Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Fleck, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled ADHD Understanding and Services in School Settings, an Evolution in Education. Leading today's presentation is Dr. Gregory Fabiano. Dr. Fabiano is a professor of psychology at Florida International University, a published author, and the developer of a massive open online course entitled Everyday Strategies for ADHD. He is passionate about developing effective intervention programs for children and families within their everyday environments. Today's webinar will highlight different approaches to classroom learning and behavior that benefit students with ADHD. We'll discuss evidence-based interventions that are alternatives to traditional IEPs and 504 plans. You'll hear about what these interventions can do to improve the educational landscape for students who learn differently. We'd like to begin today's webinar by asking this poll question to our live audience. If you could revolutionize how schools teach ADHD and LD students, what would you change? Please put your answers in the text box under the video player. For answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, and certificates of attendance, click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast number 461 to access the webinar resources. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine. Our fall issue is our special Success at School issue, which hits newsstands and doorsteps in early August. Dr. Fabiano is one of our experts in this issue who offers the best advice to help students thrive in the new school year. So sign up for Attitude Magazine for yourself or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Click the magazine tab on screen to learn more. You also won't want to miss Attitude's free ADHD learning series for educators. This 9-part newsletter training will guide educators through a comprehensive understanding of ADHD in children, plus how to effectively address its symptoms at school in ways that build brains and self-esteem. Click the link on screen or visit attitudemag.com/newsletters to sign up. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Gregory Fabiano. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this discussion.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and we have a lot of ground to cover, so I'll just launch right in. I do want to acknowledge, before I get started with talking, some conflicts of interest. Some of the research that I'll be reporting on has been funded both by federal agencies or industry partners. Some of the work that I published does receive royalties from Guilford Press, and in the past 3 years, I have had a consulting agreement with Fastbridge Learning. Those are the two publications that receive the royalties. I also should start every single talk by acknowledging that some of the research studies I'm going to tell you about are really the culmination of partnership with lots of other scholars across different universities in the U.S. and internationally. And I'm especially indebted to the children and adolescents that I've worked with who have been research participants in this study, their parents and the educators that have worked with them that are so kind in filling out the evaluations and measures we ask them to complete and to participate in our interventions. They really help us learn more to help future families walking in the same shoes perhaps have a slightly easier path. So thank you to all of them. And maybe there's somebody even at this webinar today who's been in one of our prior studies. Thank you. So we're going to talk today about ADHD. I know that's something I don't have to talk a whole lot about to this audience by way of introduction. But I will mention that we've known for a long time ADHD is characterized by these developmentally inappropriate levels of inattention, overactivity, and impulsivity. And in fact, a whole lot of effort has been dedicated towards identifying those symptoms and whether they're occurring at developmentally inappropriate levels. Perhaps people on this webinar have completed a Vanderbilt rating scale or they've participated in a diagnostic interview. I guess one thing I will argue today is that we've spent maybe too much time focused on the direct symptoms of ADHD, and we've spent less time in school settings focusing on the second bullet point on this slide, that these symptoms cause impairment in daily life functioning. These are the problems that are a consequence of being overactive or impulsive or inattentive. And when we think about what predicts long-term outcomes for a student with ADHD, it's really the areas of impairment: academic underachievement, problems in social relationships with peers or teachers, low self-esteem. Those kinds of things are really the drivers of negative long-term outcomes that we would really have to change if we were hoping to promote better outcomes for students with ADHD. And we'll come back to that point a few times today. I think it's always helpful to put ourselves in the shoes of a child with ADHD before we start talking about different treatments or interventions. And so I'm going to walk you briefly through a set of report cards that I have here. These are report cards that span first grade through sixth grade. And we'll start with first grade. And you can see already the teacher's noticing some behavioral concerns. Needs to work more slowly and carefully, trying to work neatly. Needs to keep from punching others, right? Sometimes we see some of these comorbid issues related to aggression with children with ADHD. Helping him keep his voice low and take turns. If we did have a symptom rating scale, we could already tick off a few symptoms of hyperactivity here, right? Often does not play quietly when being quiet is expected, right? Here's a comment: helping to learn to control his hands and voice. Here's second grade. You can read the comments here. Must learn to get along more cheerfully with others and obey rules. Must learn to calm down and do as he is told. Great turn of phrase here from an educator. Do wish I could find some good outlet for his boundless energy, right? Often as if driven by a motor is a symptom of ADHD, and that's exactly what the teacher is saying here, right? Here's third grade. Is trying to do the right thing at the right time. It would be a wise plan for him to go straight home after dismissal. Wouldn't you love to know what was behind the comment that drew the teacher to put that on the report card? But here we are seeing some of the challenges with rule following that we sometimes have to effectively deal with proactively with children with ADHD. You're going to notice a change in the tenor here now in fourth grade. I think astute observers here are going to notice that we're going from the more hyperactive, impulsive concerns to more inattentive concerns. In fourth grade, the teacher's mentioning it seems he does not concentrate on his work. Here's another great turn of phrase. He gives the impression of rapt attention, but when called upon, hasn't been listening. Often does not seem to listen when spoken to directly, a symptom of inattention for ADHD in the DSM manual. He does not concentrate enough to reason very simple arithmetic problems, often does not persist in tasks that require sustained mental effort. That's a symptom, right? The teacher's really talking about symptoms of ADHD in these comments. Fifth grade, you notice that the comments become more terse and more direct. Needs to show self-control, works too carelessly and too quickly, should remember not to antagonize others. And then by sixth grade, here we see what happens to some students with ADHD, that you don't even get specific comments anymore. You just get a long run-on sentence talking about all the things that aren't going right. And if any of you have really, really good vision, you would be able to see the dates on this image. This is a series of report cards from the 1940s. I show these because these comments are not far apart, and in fact, many of them are identical to the sorts of comments I see on in our clinic right now on report cards. And so ADHD hasn't really changed. It's sometimes people will say, you know what, is it just a contemporary set of issues? Is it too much screens? Is it poor parenting? Is it all these other different reasons? And I would say no to that. I would say that children with ADHD have been in school settings for a long time. The children haven't changed, but we could argue, I think, very effectively that school systems have changed. So, in fact, if you wanted to develop an environment where someone with attention, impulse control, overactivity problems would fail, you would invent the U.S. elementary school system, right? You would say we're going to have kids sit at a desk for long periods of time, maybe up to 40 minutes to an hour. We're going to give tedious tasks that are rote in, and we're going to be asked the kids to complete them throughout the day, multiple times a day in a row. We're going to ensure that all students remain quiet at all times and don't talk if they have a thought that comes into their head. And we're going to have all kinds of demands, commands, different rules and structure put upon the kid throughout the day, all day. A child with ADHD would really struggle with that environment, as they do, right? And then if you wanted to top yourself, you could easily do that. You would just create a middle school or a high school, right? In addition to all those things I just mentioned, you would have students have to manage short-term and long-term assignments. They wouldn't just have one adult who was putting these demands on top of them. We'd give them 6 adults with all different demands and expectations. And we'd also ask them to get from adult to adult throughout the day in a highly restricted amount of time, and they get in trouble if they don't manage their time well or come prepared with all the materials they're supposed to have for those 6 different adults with their 6 different expectations. So it's not surprising that we're seeing difficulties in children with ADHD in school settings and adolescents as well. And indeed, we know that school demands have increased, starting with our very lowest grades in kindergarten, which are now whole-day kindergartens, where even just a few generations ago, it might have been half-day with no academic demands embedded in it. Now we're asking kindergartners to persist through an entire school day where they're working on reading, writing, math concepts. All those things are good, but we also have to consider the developmental level of the kids that we're asking to meet all of these demands. And I think that's one place where we see a little more friction these days in schools with respect to behavior. So with that being said, I want to focus mostly on the treatment today. So I'm going to go through these initial slides fairly quickly. Happy to address anything in the question and answer session about these. And also you'll have the slides for your reference. It is important to say that ADHD does present a big impact for educators in schools. We know that about, on average, 1 to 2 students per classroom in the United States will have ADHD or behaviors that are representative of ADHD, even if it's not formally diagnosed. And we know that this has a large cost. So if you start adding up costs like special education supports, being sent to discipline office referrals, being held back a grade, or being sent to out-of-district placements, that's about $5,000 more per year per student with ADHD. And then if you aggregate that with all the other costs that we know about as a result of ADHD, it's quite a large amount of cost. So children with ADHD are more accident prone, so they end up in emergency rooms more often, or they have calls to poison control more often because of impulsive behaviors. I mentioned the education costs. We know that 50% of the crimes that adolescents do are done by 5% of adolescents. So it's not that all adolescents are getting in trouble with the law or doing things that cause property damage. It's a small number of adolescents that are doing many of the behaviors that cost money or cause problems. And then we also know parental work loss has big costs. So think about the parent who has a child with behavioral challenges. Every day they go to work, they don't know if they're going to get a call that's going to say your child's been removed from the bus due to the behavior, or you need to come and pick up your child from school or from the after-school program because of a behavior. Even if that doesn't happen that day, think of the distraction of that person who's at work, not knowing if that call is going to ever come. That has a cost. There's a financial cost, but then we're not even talking about the emotional cost of that for the caregivers. And all those things together cost a lot of money. I also think it's important when we're going to be talking about some more positive behavioral supports in these next slides. Some people have said to me, you know what, those seem like things everybody should do. They're not that important. But I'm going to spend just 2 minutes here before we move to intervention to really help us all put ourselves in the shoes of a child with ADHD. And I think it's important because I'm going to emphasize that we need to be more positive with students with ADHD as we support and work with them. And here's why. Let's think about just a single morning in the life of a student with ADHD. And let's pretend it's morning time and they're just about ready to get woken up by a caregiver. And this caregiver maybe went to a talk and they heard, I'm supposed to be really positive with my child. And so they come in with a smile and they say, rise and shine. Today's going to be a great day. Get up and get ready for school. And the child, instead of smiling back or getting out of bed, pulls the covers over their head and says, I'm not going to school. I hate school. You can't make me. And the parent says, well, you have to get up. And then they go and start to get ready with their day, maybe get the other sibling start to get ready. And they come back and the child's still in bed. And now that smile is not quite as bright. And they say, come on, this is going to be a great day. It's time to get started. I laid out your clothes, get ready for school, and I'll have a nice breakfast for you downstairs. And they leave and they continue to do their morning routine and they come back. And the child's still not out of bed. So now the smile's gone, right? They're grabbing the child by the ankles and pulling the child out of the bed and saying, come on, you have to get ready, get dressed for school. And they come back in a few moments and the child maybe has one sock on and half a pant leg and they're playing with a toy in the corner. And now the parent says, you need to get ready. Let's go, get going. And eventually the child goes through the morning routine, comes down to breakfast, and their sister's sitting across from them at the table reading a magazine. And the child reaches for that magazine impulsively and spills orange juice all over the table and all over the sister. And now the parent knows that they're going to be late and they have to take the sister upstairs, get them changed. And you can see the thermometer temperature start to rise in this parent. And now they're heading down to the bus stop and they're already mentioning to the child, you better behave yourself at this bus stop. You're kicking the gravel all over all the other parents and children at that bus stop the other day. I got a lot of dirty looks. Just stand still. And wouldn't you know it, there's a big pile of gravel that's awfully tempting. And as soon as they walk to the corner, that gets kicked all over the place. And all the parents of the kids shuffle off physically away from this parent standing at the bus stop. And it doesn't end here, right? The child gets on the bus and the bus driver is saying good morning to one child, good morning to the next. And then this child walks on the step and they don't get a good morning. They get, you're sitting right behind me today because yesterday you were hopping from seat to seat to seat. That's dangerous. You're going to sit right behind me. And really the first seat of the bus isn't where this child's supposed to sit. That's not where the peers are sitting. That's where the kindergartners sit. And so all throughout the bus ride, this child might be getting teased or bullied by the other kids for not sitting back in the middle of the bus where classmates are sitting. And it doesn't end there, right? They walk up the bus and the bus aide says, before the child even has a chance to walk, you better walk today. And then they get to the classroom, and instead of sitting down and doing their bell work, they're busy maybe checking out the turtle in the back of the classroom. They haven't taken off their backpack or hung up their coat. And the teacher's first comment to the child is not a good morning or how are you today, but hey, you better sit down. You're not going to have enough time to finish your work. And that's just one morning, right? Extrapolate that across a 6-hour day, 5 days in a week, 4 weeks in a month, 10 months in a school year for all of school. It's no wonder that the interventions that we try for a day or two don't make a dent in some of the behavior we're trying to address. And so I will argue for really intensive, long-term, sustained intervention as we talk about these different approaches. I'm happy to talk about any of these things, but I think we've admired the problem long enough. Let's talk a little bit about the positive behavioral supports that we can use for children with ADHD. I want to start by saying that when we talk to educators, most educators say that they have not received much training at all on how to tackle some of the issues that they need to in supporting a student with ADHD in their classroom. We did a survey back in 1999 where we asked teachers across the country, and only about less than 20% of them said they received a lot of training related to ADHD. We repeated that same survey 20 years later, and you can see there wasn't much of a bump at all in terms, I guess they kind of came close to doubling the number of teachers that said they had a lot of training, but it's still less than a third of teachers said that they had a lot of training related to ADHD. There's a lot of room for improvement here. And remember, 1 to 2 kids per classroom on average, it could be more, have characteristics representative of ADHD. So general educators are dealing with this whether they're effectively trained or not. And this is an area where I think we really can make a big difference. We also know that the long-term outcomes for children with ADHD, although not universally, can be shockingly poor. And we've relied a lot on things like IEPs, 504 accommodation plans. But those things are only as good as the interventions embedded within them. And we have lots of examples of interventions which are very commonly used that are probably not going to move the needle for a kid with ADHD. And I'll give you one example. I mentioned at the beginning too much emphasis on symptoms. Think about the accommodation of extended time for tests or assignments. Probably one of the most, behind preferential seating, one of the most common things that ends up in these supports for kids with ADHD. If a child with ADHD has already shown us that the child can't pay attention for 20 or 30 minutes, why would we expect extending the time would make any difference in helping that child? In some cases, it's absurd to think that a child that's been off task for that long, giving them more time is going to make them more likely to pay attention. In fact, it should make them less likely to pay attention because their best attention capacity was probably really on in that time frame. Those are the sorts of things that target symptoms, right? Distraction or difficulty persisting with sustained mental effort. And another example I could give you are the fidget spinners, which were wildly popular a few years ago. That focused on a symptom too of fidgeting. In my whole career, I've never had a parent or educator tell me his biggest problem is he fidgets too much. That's never been a major concern. It's things like academic performance is suffering because work isn't getting done. Peer relationships are impaired because of difficulty with appropriate use of social skills, difficulty with following directions. Those are the sorts of things that need to be improved to really move the needle. And so when we think about kids with ADHD, rather than these kind of summative interventions after there's been enough failure to receive a 504 accommodation plan or a IEP. And I'm not saying, please don't take this as saying those things have no role in the educational system or don't help kids with ADHD. My argument is that we should be doing a lot more, a lot sooner, and a lot more intensively. And then IEPs and 504 accommodation plans will only really be needed for children that show continued need for support. In a multi-tiered system of support, we're going to push in intervention right away, as soon as there's a determination that it can be helpful, into the general education class. So this is a intervention approach to which many educators are familiar with for reading and for academic interventions. It's also been deployed for social, emotional, behavioral interventions, but not quite as prominently. And for ADHD, I think we can make the argument that this may be the best approach for kids with ADHD, to start right away with strong universal supports in general education classrooms, followed by effective tier 2 supports that are tailored to that child's individual areas of both strength and areas in need of growth. And then the more intensive special education supports or outside supports will only be required if that tier 1 and tier 2 support strategy has been ineffective. And we know from research that for lots of kids, those tier 1 and tier 2 supports in the general education setting will be sufficient to move the needle in a positive way. So when we talk about classroom interventions, before I talk about specific interventions for students with ADHD, I think it's really important to say that the classroom itself generally should have really strong behavioral supports in place. This includes really clear and specified classroom rules and structure for particular activities. What's expected when we walk in the hall versus when we're in the cafeteria versus when we're in small groups working on academic content. Where's my assigned area? A teacher could define where I'm supposed to sit or be during independent seat work versus small group work versus maybe free time. Educators, the longer I'm in the field, I think the stronger educators are getting in this area of ignoring mild inappropriate behaviors. So I used to see a lot of emphasis on trying to get children to sit on their bottom, face forward, not move a muscle when they're in the classroom. I don't think we're putting kids through school to teach them how to be good sitters, right? We really want them to be good at reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so if a child has to stand or kneel or maybe squirm around a little bit, but they're attending, they're producing the work, teachers keeping their eye on the prize, that the academic content is being learned, that's the most important thing. And so we can ignore some of those more minor things. We also can think about pre-mat contingencies. So this is how I get my paycheck, right? When I work for a week, then I get a paycheck. We can do the same sort of thing in classrooms. When you complete this assignment, then you can go to the rug for free time. those kinds of pre-med contingencies are highly effective for kids with ADHD. And then we'll talk about some of these classroom interventions that you can use, like daily report cards, that I would argue every child with ADHD should have in place. So to summarize about tier one, we really should have mostly positive approaches. If you look at this pyramid, the foundation is just being a really genuine, positive, nice person with the child. Listen to them, get to know them, learn about their perspective, learn about who they are as a person and what their family's like and what their goals are and what their likes and dislikes are. Encourage them. There should be liberal praise and encouragement. There should be all kinds of rewards and celebrations. In fact, the students right now in school are running a deficit in rewards and celebrations because for about 2 years, our whole society said, don't go near anyone else, don't have birthday parties, don't go to holidays. And so we need to reduce that deficit by celebrating success even more. Things like commands, demands, reprimands should be used sparingly, and consequences like office referrals or calls home should really not be used hardly at all if they're effective, and they won't be needed if the child wants to stay in that bottom part of the pyramid where all the positives are happening. Unfortunately, we do know that the reality is not quite the same as that pyramid I showed you. So we've done some studies, and there have been other studies that have looked at rates of praise in American classrooms. And the best you ever get in your whole entire life, when you look at the ratio of commands, demands, reprimands, corrective feedback, the negatives compared to the positives, like I'm proud of the way that you completed that on time, or I really like the way that you helped out your friend. The best it ever gets is in kindergarten. You get, it's still a negative ratio, but there's about 2 commands, demands, reprimands for every praise statement. Throughout your development, though, the ratio gets leaner. So you get the commands, demands, reprimands stay pretty stable. In fact, go up a little bit. The praise gets less. And this is a big problem. Remember that child I told you about in the morning that's just getting yelled at, commented upon, coaxed, prodded, corrected all throughout the day. That child, the child with challenging behavior, needs many more praise statements and attaboys or attagirls than probably all the other students in the class combined, because we have to counteract all these negatives that are getting dumped on the kid from all the other places. And if that's the only thing you take away from this talk today, I'll be happy about that. That we should be complimenting and pointing out the good things about children with challenging behaviors so much more, because that's what's going to help keep them motivated to continue to produce. And I'm an optimist. I've never met in my entire career a child with ADHD that showed up and said, you know what, I really want to fail today and do a bad job. That's never happened to me. And I've worked with lots and lots of kids, lots of different places. They've always shown up wanting to be part of the group, successful, do a good job, experience the good feelings inside of following through on something they were asked to do. And so that being the case, I think it's our job as educators to figure out how do we continue to maintain that positive momentum. We do that by catching kids being good, commenting on the good things they do. We do that by avoiding bad requests, which we know are hard and particularly challenging for children with ADHD. Get requests that are long things of chains in a row, requests that are vague, like behave or knock it off, requests that you are issued as part of a question, like, don't you think you could make a better choice here? That produces the option of maybe the child thinking, well, no, this is the choice I want. Good requests are one step at a time, specific, direct. They have a period at the end. They're a single behavioral request, like put your paper in the blue folder. They're limited to the present, and there's clear consequences for compliance. When the child listens, that's a chance to catch them being good. Appreciate you listening to me the first time. That was awesome. Or noncompliance, that you repeat the same command and make sure the task gets done. Planned ignoring is a strategy that you can use, not for major behaviors, but for minor things like fidgeting or maybe some restless behavior, not comment or make a case out of that. We talked about the pre-mat contingencies. When you finish, when you put those toys away, then you can open up this puzzle. When you finish your work, then you can join me for a story on the rug. And in addition to those general best practice procedures that should be universally with all students, but particularly in a classroom with a child where there might be some challenging behavior. You can think about some tier 1 whole class approaches. And I'm happy, my contact information will be on here. I'm happy to talk with anybody about any of these. But one I would mention that really any teacher can do, and it's something that's been around for a long time, some of you may have already heard of it, is the good behavior game. And the good behavior game sets kids up in teams. There's a goal that the team is working on, like maybe the class, each team has a goal of no more than 3 interruptions while the teacher's instructing in a lesson. As long as the team meets that goal, they earn a reward at the end of that lesson. And it could be a simple reward, like a quick game of freeze dance, or maybe a chance to march around the room, or maybe some free reading. As long as the team doesn't exceed that maximum amount of check marks, they earn the reward. And then if they don't earn the reward, the next lesson, the game starts again. So there's a new earning situation right away. And the advantage of the good behavior game is that it starts to change the focus of peer attention. Rather than kids maybe laughing at someone who's being a class clown or encouraging a child who's doing something that's disruptive or breaking a class rule, now that all students are invested in meeting this goal, that peer attention goes away. And that can be a really powerful tool for teachers to make sure that they have in place so that some of these other tier 2 strategies, if they're needed, can start to work really effectively right away. And some people say, well, that seems like that's just for elementary school. It even works in high school. This is a quick example from a high school where there was a lot of disruption. And these are 3 different classes: the blue bar, the yellow bar, and the gray bar. Those represent 3 independent classrooms. They were working on an interval of time without disruptive behavior. So the teacher set a timer, and if the timer went down to 0, it was like a 2-minute timer. If it got down to 0 and the teacher wasn't interrupted at all, the class earned a point. And they were trying to earn 17 points, so 34 minutes of disruption-free instruction. They could earn free time at the end of the class period. Look what happened. At baseline, they were pretty disruptive. There were not many disruption-free intervals. When the intervention was started, they met 100% of the intervals without disruption because they wanted their free time. Free time is awful important to adolescents. They reversed it. And although the classrooms didn't get as disruptive as they were when they started, you saw immediate deterioration once that reward was taken away. They instituted it, and wouldn't you know it, the adolescents went right back to non-disruptive behavior. This is a simple intervention, didn't cost the teacher a single cent, and increased their ability to introduce their academic content in a disruption-free classroom, and the adolescents got something out of it too. They didn't have to listen to maybe the last 5 minutes of the lecture or the lesson. They could talk with their friends, something really important to them. I'm going to wrap up today with talking about a couple of tier 2 interventions. One of the things that our team has done a lot of work with is a daily report card in schools. Daily report card has been an intervention tool around for a long time. Here's an example of what one might look like for, say, a 4th or 5th grader. It's going to list some target behaviors, and they're well defined. It's not things like I had a good day today, or I was well behaved in class today, or I did my work today. It's really specific. Follows class rules with no more than 3 reminders per period, completes assignments within the designated time. And you can see the student gets a yes or no circled after each class about whether or not they made those goals. And they have a couple of goals during times of the day, which are just one time per day, like following lunch rules or following recess rules. This is a good example of a daily report card because it's specific, it's direct, and it's really clear what's expected of the child. The child understands what's expected, the parent or caregiver will understand what's expected, and the educators all know what's expected. In addition to those specific criteria, good daily report cards include immediate feedback. So during the class, if a child does break one of the class rules, the teacher should privately give feedback to say that's your first reminder for following class rules. That's important because working with lots of children with attention or behavioral challenges, they start to keep track of how many times they're doing things as part of a daily report card system. And you might find that once they get up close to that 3rd time, they really button down and focus on following the rule. It's also a communication tool. So one of the things that can happen with children with challenging behavior is my phone rings off the hook in January with caregivers saying, I just got a call from the teacher. Apparently my child's really struggling in school. I just heard about this. What can I do? That's too late oftentimes. If you set up something like a daily report card, it serves as a canary in the coal mine. If you start to see a few days or maybe the child's having difficulty in one subject with lots of no's for a few days in a row, that should kick off a talk between the educator and the parent to find out what's happening and to try to address it right away. And the most important part of the daily report card, the thing that appears to be important for it working the best, is that it has to be attached to home-based privileges or consequences. And if there is a case where it's too hard to get home-based privileges set up, then school-based privileges could be set up. But attaching it to the home consequences, like, for example, a parent might take a daily report card like this and say, every yes that you earn on this daily report card is equal to 3 minutes of screen time in the evening. And if you're going to start out the day with no screen time, every yes that you earn is 3 minutes, and you can earn a maximum of 30 minutes of screen time, perhaps. If that's something that's important to the child, then meeting those goals is going to be important to them throughout the day. We know from lots of studies that the daily report card effectively moves the needle in terms of the academic productivity, the classroom behavior, and the social behavior of students with ADHD. It's time and cost effective. And we know that it helps that students receive the immediate feedback from the teacher on how they're doing. In fact, there's lots of cases where a child might have a rocky morning, get some no's on their daily report card, and they'll course correct and turn the ship around for the rest of the day because they're invested in getting as many yeses as they can. I mentioned that the daily communication is really important. And importantly, this is positive communication, right? If we calibrate these goals correctly, this is mostly the child getting yeses and meeting goals. A daily report card is not set up right if a child's getting mostly no's on it. We want to set it up at a level where we think the child can attain yeses if they're working well and working hard. And then over the course of time, we can titrate or calibrate those goals to become a bit more challenging once the child's demonstrated that they can achieve them at the level that they're on for some period of time. It's also a useful tool for progress monitoring and monitoring outcomes. If we look over time, we can really see how the child's progressing in terms of meeting these goals we set for them. We set up a daily report card for students who are in special education. And in that study, we randomly assigned children who had ADHD and IEPs to get special education as usual. So all the services, supports, and interventions that they would typically get, and we monitored them throughout the school year. Or they got all those things that they would typically get. Plus, we set up a daily report card based on their IEP goals and objectives. So if they had a goal to be reading at grade level at the end of the year, we would have a daily report card target of complete reading assignment that day accurately within the time given. We went into all the classrooms in October and observed the children and their behavior. And then we returned in May and we watched those same kids in the same classrooms to look at their behavior. And we found out a pretty important finding, I think. For classrooms that had special education as usual, those kids didn't improve at all. Their rule violations that we observed in our observations were exactly the same in May as they were in October. So I guess that's okay. They didn't get any worse, but they didn't get any better. For children that had the daily report card, on average, those students had 8 fewer rule violations in May relative to October. And you might say, well, big deal. Well, I would say it is a big deal because this is a 30-minute observation. If we make that, say, 15 fewer rule violations in an hour, and we go across a 6-hour school day, that's 90 fewer rule violations per day. If you allow me to round that up to 100 because it's hard for me to do mental math, that would be 500 fewer rule violations per week. That's 2,000 fewer per month. And that's potentially 20,000 fewer rule violations per school year. Imagine the difference in the experience of the child that is having that many fewer rule violations over the course of their school year. That's fewer demands the teacher's putting on them, mean looks, corrective action, all of those sorts of things. And imagine what could fill the vacuum, right? All the positives that could be happening if the child is following rules and following along with the class. The daily report card in this study was effective in doing that. For students that already had IEPs, all these children in the study were already receiving special education supports and services. So I'll also mention to you, a lot of people have questions about medication versus behavior therapy in school settings. And I'll just tell you very briefly, and then I'll wrap up, about a few studies we did here along with our team. We, in a summer classroom setting, looked at the different interactive effects of medication versus behavior therapy in classroom settings. So we had some conditions where we didn't have any behavior therapy in place at all beyond bare bones, like we had class rules and we praised kids if they did well, but there were no contingencies in place for kids' behavior. We had a low-intensity behavioral therapy approach, which was a daily report card. And then we had a high-intensity behavioral therapy approach, which was a daily report card plus a point system plus a timeout system. And you can see from this graph right here that all the action, really the biggest change in children's behavior in the classroom came between the bare bones behavioral therapy approach to the low behavior therapy approach. The daily report card really did a lot of work in getting kids from an average of a high number of rule violations per day to a low number. And then the high intensity program resulted in an incremental effect, but there wasn't as much room to grow. Look at the effect of medication alone in this classroom setting. You needed close to the highest dose of medication to get the same kind of impact that we got on the low or high intensity behavioral therapy approach. And you can see adding medication into the lower high behavior therapy approach results in incremental gains. But if you look at that 0.15 milligrams per kilogram, that's a pretty small dose of stimulant medication. And if you combine that with the low intensity or high intensity behavior therapy approach, that got you about as good as you were going to get. And importantly, at that very low dose of stimulant medication, there were no severe side effects for any of the students that participated in this study. So that led us to a question about, well, we know we have these two different treatments for ADHD. Which should we do first? Should you use medication first, or should you use behavioral treatment first? And we used a study design where we tested that directly. Half of the kids in the study were assigned to behavioral treatment first, half were assigned to medication treatment first. And we evaluated them every month throughout the school year. If they needed more treatment, if the teacher said there's still room for the child to grow in terms of improving in their behavior or their academic productivity, we randomly assigned them. We flipped a coin, and they either received a higher dose of whatever they started with. So if they got medication, we gave them more medication. If they got behavior therapy, we increased the intensity of the behavior therapy. Or we crossed them over to whatever they didn't start with. So if they started with behavioral therapy, we added in medication. If they started with medication, we added in behavioral therapy. So we could look at all these different combinations in this study. And the most important finding I'll mention from this study is that we learned that regardless of any of these combinations or different things kids got, one of the most important things was that the children who started with behavior therapy first did better at the end of the school year than kids that got medication first. And we think one reason for that is that parents and teachers, if the child started with medication, they didn't engage with the behavior therapy in the same way if that was offered later. So people that got behavior therapy first, when we offered a parenting program, almost all the parents attended all the sessions. They attended booster sessions. When we started with medication and added behavior therapy second, we had many fewer parents engage with that. And it was the same thing with the teachers. When we started with behavior therapy, all the teachers utilized the daily report card and kept it up for the duration of the school year. When we started with medication, we had a lot more variability in whether or not the daily report card was consistently deployed. And so we think this is an important finding in terms of sequencing related to helping us maintain effective interventions over the long run for children with ADHD. And I think I'll end there. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, well, thank you for that terrific presentation. Naturally, we had quite a few questions around the daily report card. So a few questions were around how to get teachers to do a daily report card when they might feel it's too time consuming for them because they have a high workload, how to get buy-in from them to do this.
Yeah, I won't deny that it's more work, and I will not. If there's any sector of society that I feel an incredible debt to, and I'm very grateful for, it's educators right now. They have been through the ringer in the past 3 or 4 years, a ringer unlike any profession has probably been through at least in my lifetime. I would say that children with behavior challenges take a lot of time and effort already, regardless of what you're doing. That's why we're at the point where we might be considering something like a daily report card. And I would further argue that the initial time and effort costs up front to get it started and off the ground are worth it if it promotes rule following in the classroom, that child being more successful in their academics, their child benefiting from the educator's good instruction. And I guess I should also say something here that I think is important, that there is accountability for caregivers in the daily report card as well. That they're following up every day with reviewing it with the child and providing those home-based consequences is one of the things that makes it work. And if that's not happening consistently, that's maybe one of the main reasons why I see educators become frustrated or maybe disenfranchised from doing this sort of intervention every day. And I think what it leads me to think is that it's just really important for everybody to keep their eye on what's the most important thing, which is what's going to help this child be successful. And I think every child deserves the right to have the best opportunity to be successful in educational settings. And that means all of us have to do our job to figure out how to get them there.
A parent asks, what happens if the child has meltdowns every time he sees the daily report card that shows he's not meeting his goals for the day? Is that a positive or that's not positive? So how to deal with that?
Yeah, so I think that's a reasonable question. When we start up new behavioral support plans for students, it's not uncommon for behavior to get worse before it gets better. If we stop the intervention because of the meltdowns, I would be concerned that we're teaching a lesson that all you have to do is melt down enough and then we'll take these demands away. And so as a good applied behavior analyst, I would be working with the team to figure out what's the trigger or antecedent for this meltdown. Is there anything we can do to reduce the impact of whatever that antecedent is? Does that mean we need to change the reward system to maybe make it more salient or more interesting for the child? Is there something we can do on the feedback side? For some students, it's good not to provide feedback immediately right away. But without getting too much into the weeds, I would say that good skilled professionals can almost always get together and problem solve what might be the right collection of strategies to use for a student who's having some of these challenges.
A teacher says that some of her coworkers who are teachers struggle ignoring negative or inappropriate behaviors from students with ADHD. They worry about the fairness of ignoring these behaviors when other students receive correction.
Yeah, so I would say an educator put this to me one way. They said, fair does not always mean equal. And there's going to be some students that are going to need more or different effort to help them achieve the same goals that all the students are being asked to achieve. And my sense is from being in lots of classrooms is if the educator is using label praise, is using that good universal behavioral support approach, every child is getting theirs, right? They're getting the attention that they're asking for, that they want. They're understanding what their path to success or achievement is. And usually that's not an issue so much for the kids. It's more an issue for the adults that they have to work through and figure out, is this process okay, given that the goal we have is a really important one, that this child should get a fair shake in my classroom.
We had naturally caregivers ask, what's the best way to approach a teacher who doesn't understand how ADHD manifests in the classroom and believes that the child is being disruptive because ADHD symptoms and that ADHD is an excuse for poor behavior or performance? Is there a script or something that very effectively helps teachers understand what's behind these symptoms?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess one thought I would have is to, regardless of the cause, adults would want to solve a problem, right? And so if you approach these kinds of situations with a problem-solving lens, that we all want to not have to have another one of these meetings to talk about an issue, right? We want to have a meeting where we're admiring the collaboration and the success. What can we do to work together to try to promote better outcomes in your classroom? And that way you kind of avoid the back and forth about what's causing it or the reasons, which in the long run aren't going to matter quite as much if the child's put on a positive track and starting to experience the natural success of doing well in that educator's classroom. I guess my quick answer would be to perhaps approach it in a real practical way. Like, how can we get this problem solved?
Mm-hmm. What could parents do to push for better teacher training in our schools?
Well, that's a really good question. I think talking to some of the school leaders that determine professional development topics or emphases for the year, that might include the building principal or even people up in the superintendent's office. It could involve talking with educators and asking them what they could do in terms of promoting some of the needs they identify themselves and supporting a child with challenging behaviors in the classroom. And then I guess there are policymakers even beyond the school districts or the school levels. We should probably be trying to talk more to them and figure out how we can make sure that every student is supported in our classrooms in this country.
Another question is, what should we be advocating for or demanding from our child's teacher in school? What accommodations aren't effective?
Well, I guess I always encourage parents and educators not to get into I hope that they're not getting into a situation where they're having to demand for particular supports or interventions. Again, keeping our eye on the most important thing, it's that this child is successful. I think educators and parents will always agree on that that goal is united. But I would say that maybe the individualized education program has been not quite as emphasized as this should be over time, and really thinking about the child and what's causing them to have academic or social or emotional concerns within the school setting, and what would be a good intervention to address those things. The areas of impairment related to those things, not the symptoms of ADHD, would be something I would encourage caregivers to make sure gets discussed in some of these meetings. So not focusing so much on reducing problems of inattention. How do we increase academic productivity? Slight tweak, but an important one.
Another caregiver says, my child has ADHD, anxiety, depression, and OCD, and is entering middle school. Because she's a quiet student, her struggles are often overlooked. How can I get teachers to see that her issues are not an excuse for her performance?
So as children move to middle school or high school, I do think the educational landscape becomes more challenging for parents to negotiate because they don't have that single teacher or a few teachers that's representative of elementary school educational settings. One place to start would be with the school counselor in the middle school or the high school. That is often a really useful source of information and support for caregivers. The other thing would be to ask that counselor to broker a meeting with all the teachers that are on the team of the student. Many of these teams meet together routinely. They care very much about their students, and having a caregiver meet with them and maybe describe the strengths of their child, but also maybe some of the areas of concern, and figuring out a way to create a feedback mechanism that might be like a daily report card, but not necessarily exactly the same format as one you might use in elementary school. Perhaps a behavioral contract, or perhaps another mechanism of the counselor being a conduit for information from the teaching team to share with the parent. Those kinds of approaches can work well with adolescents with ADHD.
What can teachers do to encourage their students to create an inclusive classroom for the kids who do have ADHD? And what can students do to support these kids in their class?
Oh, that's a neat question. I would say that probably starts with modeling, right? If the adults are always correcting or commenting about the behavior of a particular student, that really opens the door for other students to do that as well, right? So having an approach that really shows very clearly that every student in that classroom is valued and their contributions are appreciated is one that will set a tone for that whole classroom. Helping the student that maybe is getting a few more of the corrective feedback comments from the teacher to take some leadership roles in the class where appropriate can be helpful as well. And then, again, saturating that class with positives and labeled praise statements about the good things that are happening in the classroom, that the students are doing, that they're doing in collaboration with one another, and that they're also doing as part of the larger class group. That's going to be really effective in promoting a lot more feelings of collegiality and less feelings of, this particular student doesn't deserve the same level of respect or attention.
Social skills are often seen as secondary to academic learning, but they're the foundations for a happy, confident child, and my child could use help in this area. How can I discuss this with my child's teacher to get her to understand?
And just let me make sure I understand this question. This is to promote social skills training?
Yes, and her student at school.
Well, there are a number of different social emotional programs that schools are now using universally. So I think there's plenty of understanding that this is an important set of tools for all students to develop from. This could be a case where, again, meeting with the teacher, but also meeting with somebody on the school counseling team or the school psychologist who may be equipped to do some of the social skills training that's necessary if there is a deficit in a particular area of social skills. That might be really important. But then for children with ADHD, if we're confident that they have the knowledge about what the social skills are supposed to be, they're just not applying them appropriately in the situations where it's challenging for them. Again, I guess I would emphasize that, again, that's a role for the daily report card, right? That using social skills appropriately during large group instruction or small group work or in the cafeteria or on the bus, that becomes something that we call the child's attention to with a specific goal, and they earn positive consequences for really attending to their use of that skill in those important times later in the day due to their success in meeting their goal.
A parent asks, my middle school child cannot work once she gets home from school. I've tried structure, rewards, etc. She'll go to extra help and sometimes she'll go to extra help and sometimes get stuff done there. But once she's home, she's done, and she just needs to play and unwind. Do you have any suggestions for this?
This is a great question. That's a very common issue for homework time in particular. And my heart goes out to children and adolescents that have been sitting and being asked to do work all day, and then they have more work when they get home. The most successful strategy that I've ever seen used by caregivers is to do the opposite of what most parents do. Most parents give the child time to unwind, to have a snack, to do some free play, de-stress, and then they ask them to do the homework later. If we think about pre-mat contingencies where we put the less preferable activity before the more preferable activity, I would say, other than falling asleep, every activity for the whole rest of that evening is going to be better than doing homework. And so if that is the least preferable activity, it should happen first. And parents have been successful in doing things like saying, I'm going to set this timer for an hour on the microwave. Your screen time can happen within this hour, or your access to your phone or whatever it is that the child might like. But you can't get to it until your homework is done and I check it over to make sure it's done acceptably. For many kids, that is the sort of specific goal, time-limited task with a clear benefit to themselves that happens right afterwards, that can be highly effective. And so set the timer. Okay, I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to produce it. I'm going to take my medicine and get this out of the way. Now, as soon as it's done, Mom, can you come in here and take a look at it? Yeah, okay, that looks good. It's done. Put it back in your folder. Put it in your backpack. Okay, looks like you have 35 minutes where you can go on this tablet. And that'll be your only time for this evening where you'll have access to this thing that you like. That kind of approach can work really effectively. It may not work effectively initially, the first day or two that you try it. But if that's a really important task for your child or a really important activity that they like, eventually they will get that work done in time.
Okay. And then our last question is, I'm a middle school teacher who also has ADHD. I often give deadline extensions on work to students with ADHD. However, it still doesn't get done. And this sort of goes back to what you were saying in your presentation. I've been told to give them a 0, which drops their overall grade in class and obviously doesn't make them feel good. Is there a way I can avoid giving them a 0? And also with my ADHD and having so many students who don't complete work on time, this becomes stressful and overwhelming because their deadlines for missing work come so close to my deadline for grading work.
So a colleague of mine, Steve Evans, talks a lot about work with adolescents and the risk of our accommodations lowering the bar for the child with ADHD, essentially giving them less of a strict or rigorous academic experience. And that might be a problem because eventually we want to have students go through school and become productive adults that join our workforce or develop a career or develop their own business or their own type of work. And if we consistently do things like extend deadlines and extend deadlines and extend deadlines, that it essentially just creates the test just balloons to the deadline we give it. An alternative that might work more effectively would be giving shorter deadlines for chunks of the work leading up to whatever the eventual deadline is, so that as an educator and as a student, you know right away if you're falling behind or if you're staying on track. And that kind of approach is likely to work more effective for a student with ADHD than giving long extended deadlines, because let's be honest, for just about everybody, we do our work the day before that deadline whenever we set it. And you just have to go to the post office on April 14th to know when people do their taxes, right? We work up to deadlines. And that's no different for somebody with ADHD. Giving them longer deadlines is probably not resulting in lots more work being done in the interim. It's probably just, in many cases, kicking the can down the road.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Fabiano, thank you so much for joining us today and for contributing your expertise to benefit our ADHD community. We very much appreciate that.
Thanks for the great questions.
And thanks to today's listeners and their great questions. Make sure you don't miss future Attitude webinars, articles, or research updates by signing up to receive our free email newsletters at attitudemag.com/newsletters. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast number 461 to access the webinar resources. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for yourself or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Thank you and have a great day.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.